I'd like to introduce three members of our board who will be speakers tonight: Russ Stout, Perry Morris, and Jim Painter. And I will hand it over to Russ.
Good evening. Welcome to Slate Belt Heritage Center, our presentation for Veterans Day. I'm Russ Stout, and I'll be co-hosting tonight with the program with military veterans Perry Morris and Jim Painter. Tonight's presentation is titled, "What and Who is a Veteran?" At this time, I'd like to ask all veterans in the room to please rise and be recognized. We wish to thank you for your service to our country and to dedicate this program to you. At this time, please remain standing. At this time, we'd like to present to you a keepsake in remembrance of your service. It's a star from a United States flag that is being honorably retired from service.
Anybody else? If anybody wants one, they can come up and get after.
I'll take one.
Yeah, Jim gets one. Give Jim.
Thank you.
That's my bunkie.
Okay. Please remain standing. Will the rest of the audience now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag, led by Perry Morris and Jim Painter.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And thanks especially to you veterans, for it's your dedication and sacrifice that allows us the freedoms to celebrate and honor the 100th anniversary of Veterans Day. Tonight we'll be honoring the great scope of service by American men and women in all the armed forces of the United States of America, past and present. At this time, I have to offer a disclaimer. When the announcement of this program was made in the paper, it was inferred that I was a veteran. I am not a veteran. I've never claimed to be one, but I have so many friends and everything else, a lot of relatives, and I called to correct it right away because it bothered me greatly. So they changed that in the next issue, so that was corrected. And I just wanted to issue that because I have a lot of friends that are veterans, a lot of relatives of veterans, and if they saw that, I was greatly disturbed by it. It's an honest mistake because they didn't know. I mean, even Jim didn't know I was a veteran. But anyway, I offer a quote in answer to the question, what is a veteran? A veteran, whether active duty, honorably discharged, retired, or in reserve, is someone who at one point in his life wrote a blank check made payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including his life. That is honor. There are far too many people in this country today who no longer understand that fact. First, I'd like to talk about the history of Veterans Day. Before the end of the Great War, World War I, there was no national event honoring veterans of our previous wars or conflicts. Soldiers and sailors were mustered out at war's end or discharged when their time of service was over, without much fanfare. Victory parades were mostly local, usually of brigade or unit size in their towns, counties, or states. Most veterans were allowed to keep their weapons, given a few days' rations, and told to find their way home, return to their way of life, and deal with life as they could. Throughout the years, towns or areas would hold annual or anniversary events featuring veterans, but nothing was official. The honoring of our veterans really began in earnest following the homecoming of our troops from Europe after the Great War. The war in Europe on the Western Front ended with an armistice at the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month, which was 1918. It was the war to end all wars, and is the only war in history that all fighting was to stop at an appointed time. Future President Harry Truman, an artillery officer at the time, said the noise was deafening at the end. 27 years later, he would be making a decision that was quite different about ending a war. 11 o'clock, the morning of November 11th, 1918. That was the day, the time, the hour. President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed in 1919 that the 11th of November would be Armistice Day. In England and Canada, it was proclaimed Remembrance Day with 2 minutes of silence at 11 a.m. Today it is still honored as Remembrance Day in the UK. On November 11, 1920, London's Westminster Abbey's bells chimed as England laid its unknown soldier to rest. On November 11, 1921, at Arlington Cemetery, America's unknown soldier was laid to rest. Jim will talk about that later. On the 4th of June, 1926, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution that the recurring anniversary of November 11, 1918 would be commemorated with thanksgiving and prayer and exercises designed to perpetuate peace through goodwill and mutual understanding between nations, and that the President should issue an annual proclamation calling for the observance of Armistice Day. It became a legal holiday. On May 13, 1938, Franklin Delano Roosevelt repeated those words of the resolution, declaring November 11th a federal holiday. To quote a veteran, "Veterans are a symbol of what makes our nation great, and we must never forget all they have done to ensure our freedom." Another quote by an unknown source. "Today is a day we should reminisce for those who fought valiantly for pride, honor, and freedom of our country." In 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower declared that Armistice Day would be changed to Veterans Day in order to include the veterans of World War II and Korea. In 1971, from 1971 until 1977, Veterans Day was included in the Federal Uniform Mondays Holiday Act, and it was celebrated on a Monday. In 1975, though, President Gerald Ford declared that the actual date carries historical and patriotic significance to many Americans, and restored November 11th as the observance day, starting in 1978. To this day, our 100th observance, Veterans Day pays tribute to all veterans, living or dead, and gives thanks especially to living veterans who served our country honorably during war and in peace. Before turning the program over to Jim and Perry, I'd like to put a few things forward. From the Revolutionary War in 1775 to 1778, to Desert Shield, Desert Storm in 1991, between 42 and 48 million men and women have served our country, and that includes Civil War Confederate country veterans who our government recognizes as our veterans also. During those 216 years, nearly 1 million soldiers of those were killed in action. During those same years, nearly 1.5 million have been wounded or died of disease or starvation. Many, many more, unaccounted for, have suffered the traumas and tribulations of war. In the 30 years since Desert Storm, Desert Shield, many more have been added to those lists. I'd like to follow up with some of this later, but right now I want our two veterans to take over. Jim?
Evening, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the program so far, honoring all the men and women who have served our nation. I'm honored to be here tonight with my friends, Perry and Russ. Always a pleasure working with you. I feel we cannot do this program without the history of the most iconic memorial in our nation. That is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington, Virginia. Tonight we'll present a short history of the creation of this very important memorial, as it also coincides with the 100th anniversary of the tomb, 1921 to 2021. So we'll start with December 1920. New York Congressman and World War I veteran Hamilton Fish Jr. proposed legislation that provided for the interment of one unknown American soldier at a special tomb to be built in Arlington National Cemetery. The purpose of the legislation was to bring home the body of an American warrior who in himself represents no section, creed, or race in the late war, and who typifies, moreover, the soul of America and the supreme sacrifice of her heroic dead. In October 1921, 4 bodies of unidentified U.S. military personnel were exhumed from different American military cemeteries in Europe. On October 23, 1921, the 4 caskets arrived in France. Officials and members of the U.S. Army's Quartermaster Corps had prepared for the selection ceremony. Early on the morning of October 24, 1921, Major Robert Harbold of the Quartermaster Corps, aided by French and American soldiers, rearranged the caskets so that each rested on a shipping case other than the one in which it had arrived. Major Harbold then chose Sergeant Edward Younger, American forces in Germany, to select the unknown soldier. Sergeant Younger selected the unknown by placing a spray of white roses on one of the caskets. From France, the USS Olympia transported the unknown soldier's casket to Washington, D.C. The unknown arrived in the Washington Navy Yard on November 9, 1921. After arriving in Washington, D.C., the unknown laid in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. About 90,000 visitors paid their respects during the public visiting period on November 10, 1921. As a note, the USS Olympia is now a museum ship in Philadelphia's Penn's Landing. On November 11, 1921, the unknown was placed on a horse-drawn caisson and carried in a procession through Washington, D.C. and across the Potomac River. A state funeral ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery, and the unknown was interred in the tomb of the unknown soldier. President Warren Harding officiated at the ceremony and placed the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, on the casket. Numerous foreign dignitaries presented their nation's highest awards as well. Originally, the tomb of the unknown soldier consisted of a simple marble slab. During its early years, thousands of visitors came to Arlington National Cemetery to mourn at the tomb and to pay their respects to the unknown soldier and the military personnel he represented. The tomb is decorated with 3 wreaths on each panel. On the front, 3 figures represent peace, victory, and valor. The back features the inscription, "Here rests in honor, glory, an American soldier known but to God." Just as a note, a memorial of a World War II soldier, a very nice memorial, is located in our area in Tatamy at their town hall. It's well maintained and it's well worth the visit. It's very nice. Also, from the time period from 1921 to 1937, there were no guards at the tomb. Finally, in 1937, soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard, were stationed at the tomb 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and all year long. And they did that because it was turning into a picnic area. And that was very disrespectful. That's why they wanted to make sure that there's guards there. All right, now we're going to move to the World War II and the Korean War unknowns. Following World War II, Americans supported the idea of honoring an unknown from that war. However, the start of the Korean War in 1950 delayed those plans. In August 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower approved the selection and interment of the unknown from both World War II and Korea. Fought on 4 continents, World War II complicated the selection of the unknown. The chosen unknown needed to represent all unidentified American dead, not just those from one theater of war. In 1958, the Army exhumed 13 bodies from military cemeteries across North Africa and Europe. On May 12, 1958, Major General Edward O'Neill placed a red and white wreath on one of the 13 caskets, selecting the unknown who would represent Europe and North Africa theater of World War II. The selected casket was then taken aboard the USS Blandy for its journey to the United States. To represent the Pacific theater of World War II, the Army exhumed 5 bodies from the Manila American Cemetery and the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, known as the Punch Bowl, in Hawaii. At the time, they exhumed 4 bodies from the Korean War that were also buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. 9 caskets were brought to the Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii on May 15, 1958. Army Master Sergeant Ned Lyle selected the Korean War unknown. The next day, Air Force Colonel Glenn Eagleston selected the World War II Trans-Pacific unknown. The USS Blandy and the USS Boston met the USS Canberra off the coast of Virginia. On May 26, 1958, all 3 caskets were placed on the deck of the Canberra, with the Korean War unknown placed between the 2 World War II unknowns. Navy Hospital Corpsman, First Class William Charette, a Medal of Honor recipient from the Korean War, then selected the World War II unknown. The caskets of the World War II and the Korean War unknowns were then transported to Washington, D.C. after the selection process. Both unknowns arrived in Washington, D.C. on May 28, 1958, and lay in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda for 2 days. 2 days later, the unknowns were transported to Arlington National Cemetery and interred in crypts to the west of the World War I unknown. Now we'll move up to the Vietnam War unknown. Before the Vietnam War ended, Arlington National Cemetery began making preparations to add a 3rd crypt to the tomb. However, many people believe that advances in technology would mean that all remains from Vietnam could eventually be identified. In response to mounting political pressure to recognize a Vietnam War unknown, President Jimmy Carter and Max Cleveland, administrator of the United States Veterans Administration and a Vietnam veteran, dedicated a bronze plaque honoring American service members in the Vietnam War on Veterans Day, November 11, 1978, at the Memorial Amphitheater. By May of 1984, only 1 set of recoverable remains had not been identified. In California, the Vietnam War unknown was loaded on a C-141B Starlifter and flown to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. The Vietnam War unknown lay in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda from May 25th to May 28, 1984. On Memorial Day, May 28th, a military procession transported the casket to the Arlington National Cemetery for burial. On Memorial Day, 1984, President Ronald Reagan presided over the interment ceremony at Arlington. In his eulogy, Reagan assured the audience that the government would continue looking for Vietnam War's missing in action MIA personnel. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War unknown would lay at rest at the tomb of the unknown soldier for almost 14 years. Through DNA testing and other scientific advances, almost all the recoverable remains can be identified. Many World War II unknowns are being exhumed and also identified. As an example, the battleship Oklahoma that was sunk at Pearl Harbor had over 430 unknowns. Recently, over 300 have been positively identified. Getting back to the Vietnam. The Department of Defense and the civilian partners continued working to identify remains recovered from Vietnam. Through these efforts, they received evidence that suggested the Vietnam War unknown was likely Air Force First Lieutenant Michael Joseph Blassie, a pilot who had been shot down in 1972. At the request of Blassie's family, the Department of Defense exhumed the remains from the Vietnam unknown crypt on May 14, 1998. Using DNA testing, scientists positively identified the remains as those of Blassie. In accordance with the wishes of his family, Blassie was reinterred at the Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri. The crypt designated for the Vietnam War unknown remains vacant to this day. On September 17, 1999, National POW MIA Recognition Day, it was rededicated to honor all missing U.S. service members from wars and conflicts. Also in the decade of the 1990s, Sergeant Heather Wagner became the first woman to earn the Honor Guard badge. That happened in 1996. She was one of only 4 women to ever earn that badge of honor. So now I would like to conclude my portion of tonight's program and turn it over to Perry. Thank you very much for your attention.
I want to ask you folks to just bear with me a little bit. Even though we got a small crowd with this here tie and fancy shirt on, I still feel like the raciest at the bridge. And if anybody has to wonder how I know about Horatius in the bridge, well, it's not that I'm very educated or not, but I read a book once, and it told about that. That was a long time ago. First of all, I want to say thank you and welcome home to all the veterans. Some of them never got it. He's the man at the bar having a beer and maybe smoking a cigarette. He has a pot gut, but his eyes are still clear and blue. In his younger days, he was an expert marksman and he served his country well. She is the mother or the grandmother in her kitchen with flour smudges on her apron and her face. But in her younger days, she was a military nurse who gave aid and comfort to the dying and wounded soldiers. He's the doctor in an emergency hospital who took advantage of his military training as a Navy corpsman who was assigned to a Marine unit. Using the GI Bill, he completed his medical education. He's the man in the wheelchair playing basketball with the neighborhood kids. He's the farmer working in his fields. We have school teachers, office workers, police and firemen and emergency personnel. And even the father reading a bedtime story to his children. And many others. They're all veterans. All served their country at some point in their lives. Many saw combat, and many did not, but they were all soldiers and all veterans. And some of them are in a dark place, and they'll never be out of that dark place. Some are homeless, living on the streets and under bridges. Some are in VA hospitals, and some are in nursing homes with a blank stare, staring in or staring at who knows what, because they just can't be reached. Only God knows what they're feeling or what they're seeing, or even what they hear. A thank you seems such very little for all they gave. They gave of themselves for the freedoms enjoyed by everyone here in America. As I said, it seems so little, but it is all we have. Now I'd like you folks to bear with me for just a few more minutes. A few decades ago, we were watching television one night down home, and it was Saturday night, and before Gunsmoke come on, had to watch March. Well, that was the deal. And it was on what they called Armed Forces Day. And they were honoring military service personnel. And a man named Aladdin came out. And he told a story. Aladdin was a veteran. Now, some changes have been made since I said that was decades ago, since I heard this. It's called I Am the United States. I've got 2 sheets of paper here. I had to update a little bit of it. I was born on July 4th, 1776. The Declaration of Independence is my birth certificate. The bloodlines of the world and patriots run in my veins because I offer freedom to the oppressed. I am the United States. I am over 300 million souls. I am Nathan Hale and Paul Revere. I am Washington, Jefferson, Patrick Henry, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, and Abraham Lincoln. I am the Brooklyn Bridge and the wheat fields of Kansas. I am the coal fields of West Virginia and Pennsylvania. I am the rich lands of the West and the Grand Canyon. I am Independence Hall. And I am big. I am from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. I am over 3 million square miles, throbbing with industry. I am more than 5 million farms. I am mountains and deserts. I am the Alamo, the Maine, Port Harbor, and the Twin Towers. I am Independence Hall. I am villages, small, and I am cities that never sleep. I am Benjamin Franklin, walking the streets of Philadelphia with a loaf of bread under his arm. I am Betsy Ross, sewing the flag. I am the flag seen by Francis Scott Key. I am freedom of speech. I am freedom of religion. I am Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron and the World Series. I am over 170,000 schools and colleges. I am a vote on election day and the roar of the crowd at a sports stadium. I am a newspaper and a news commentator, the music of a choir. I am the voices of preachers in over 250,000 churches where people worship God as they please. I am Eli Whitney and Thomas Edison and Billy Graham. I'm the astronaut walking on the moon. I am a fireman and a policeman at the World Trade Center. I am a soldier fighting to protect our freedoms. I am an American who loves liberty and freedom. I am the United States. I was born free, and God willing, in freedom I will remain. May I have the integrity and the courage to always stand with those who've gone before. To be a beacon in this world, to keep our nation indivisible and one nation under God. I am the United States. Thank you very much for listening to me, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless you. And to the veterans here and the veterans not here, welcome home. Welcome home.
Very stirring. Thank you, Jim and Terry, for your presentations. Thank you for your service to our country. And thank you for being my friend. With what time we have left, I'd like to broach on a subject I feel needs addressing, and that is our treatment of our honored veterans. I'd like to quote two great Americans. One, Florida U.S. Representative Jeff Miller. His quote is, "The willingness of America's veterans to sacrifice for our country has earned them our lasting gratitude." The second, from President Theodore Roosevelt. "A man who is good enough to shed his blood for his country is good enough to be given a square deal afterwards." Our veterans through the years have not always been given that square deal they've deserved. Although most honorably discharged service personnel have fared well re-entering private life, civilian life, many have had a very hard time adapting. Without getting too involved in the reasons for each of our conflicts, post-service trials and tribulations, I'll only address a few, only because there are so many. Earlier on, there were fewer medicines and fewer surgical techniques, and sanitary conditions caused many deaths, and also infection caused deaths. With the advancement of medicines and more sanitary surgical procedures, deaths in battle gradually decreased, although battlefield injuries increased. And with war's long-lasting effects from physical and psychological injuries on veterans came addictions to pain-killing drugs and alcohol. More laudanum and opium addictions came out of the Civil War than any other conflict. Disease and illness have caused long-term problems, from malaria, tuberculosis, typhus, venereal disease, mustard and nerve gases, napalm, and Agent Orange. PTSDs have taken its toll in every war, from witnessing the carnage of battle, to shell shock, to massive bombing raids in World War II, to being a prisoner of war, and being a corpsman or MASH units dealing with the dying and the seriously wounded, and other haunting experiences. Just because a soldier returns from a war zone doesn't mean his battles are over. Returning to civilian life, these traumas confronting veterans have brought about many problems, including societal relationships, employment difficulties, homelessness, substance abuse, suicide, and also criminal activity. I believe, and I expect I speak for most American citizens, a square deal means a lifetime commitment to our veterans, from free health care to housing to whatever needs are warranted. Relief should be available. That's a square deal. Ronald Reagan once stated, "Some people live an entire lifetime and wonder if they ever made a difference in the world. A veteran doesn't have that problem." I ask at this time and at all the time to donate and support the American Legion and other veterans programs, including Disabled American Veterans, Wounded Warriors Project, Tunnels to Towers, and many others that take care of our veterans. General Douglas MacArthur's duty, honor, country has been our Guardians of the Gates mantra throughout the years. Our men and women have answered the call for help worldwide many times to fight against tyranny and oppression in countries they might never have heard of, for people of color and creed they do not know, and for reasons they might not be sure of. They have given their commitment to something bigger than themselves. One more thing to note. Many of our veterans continue to serve their country and their community after service by entering careers as peace officers or firefighters. As first responders, our domestic dramas, as first responders to our domestic dramas, these citizen soldiers move forward into harm's way to protect and serve our country again and again. Winston Churchill's statement honoring his Royal Air Force's defense of England during the Battle of Britain, his statement was, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." That applies to American warriors many times over throughout the world, throughout the years. Let me close with a fitting quote from an unknown source about our honored veterans. "We don't know them all, but we owe them all." Thank you for coming tonight, and again, thank you for all your veterans for your service to the United States of America. Thank you.